You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the capture of Montreal on November 13th, 1775. For several months in the early fall of 1775, the Continental Army had besieged the British Army at St. John's, Quebec. The fort at St. John's sat on the Richelieu River just north of Lake Champlain and just south of Montreal. British Commander Guy Carleton had deployed the bulk of his British regulars there, hoping to prevent the Continental Army from moving further north. The British defended themselves against a much larger Continental Army besieging them. But after about 2 months, and after Carleton's attempt to lead a force of Loyalists and Indians to break the siege failed, the British commander at Fort St. John's surrendered. Carleton was at Montreal when Fort St. John's fell. He had with him the remainder of the British regulars in Canada, about 150 men. They, of course, would be no match for the Continental Army that would soon be approaching. On November 11th, after spending a few days spiking their cannons and destroying supplies that might fall into the enemy's hands, Carleton put his men on ships and sailed downriver to get back to Quebec City. Carleton advised the inhabitants left behind in Montreal to surrender peacefully. The Continentals entered and took control of Montreal 2 days later, on November 13th, without a shot fired. When the Continentals approached, General Montgomery gave them 4 hours to surrender. The locals asked that the Continentals accept certain terms for protecting private property and civilian rights, and a variety of other conditions, such as returning prisoners of war and allowing them to continue trading with Britain. Montgomery pointed out that they had no defenses and nothing to bargain with, but that he would of course protect their rights in hopes that they were going to join the fight against the British and send delegates to the Continental Congress. But he would not guarantee any terms nor return any prisoners of war. The people of Montreal had no choice but to accept. Meanwhile, Carleton was struggling just to retreat back to Quebec. With the winds against him, he soon found that his fleet was under attack by Continental Colonel James Easton's artillery. Easton sent word to Carleton that he was prepared to blow his fleet out of the water unless the British surrendered. Unable to get the winds on his side, Carleton agreed to surrender his fleet on November 15th. Now, Easton had pulled off a bluff. He had nowhere near enough cannons to destroy the ships. If Carleton had attempted to push past the battery, he almost certainly would have brought the ships safely back to Quebec. Although Carleton had surrendered his fleet, he opted not to surrender himself. On the night of November 16th, he dressed himself as a French peasant, got into a canoe, and quietly paddled past the Patriot camp. A few miles downstream, he found the home of a friendly local and caught a few hours' sleep. And the next morning, he found a squad of Patriots at the door demanding quarters. While the Patriots argued with the homeowner, Carleton, still dressed as a French civilian, simply walked out the door and began walking downstream. He soon hailed a British ship, the Fell, and caught a ride back to Quebec. Meanwhile, his second-in-command surrendered the fleet along with the regulars that were aboard. With that, the British had no more regulars in Canada to defend anything. Around the same time that the British regulars were being taken prisoner, Colonel Benedict Arnold's Continentals, having recovered from the march across the Maine wilderness, took up positions on the Plains of Abraham, just outside the city walls of Quebec. It looked at the time as if the entire province of Quebec would fall to the Americans. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. I originally covered these events in episode 78 of the American Revolution podcast. I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you like, or you can listen to episodes directly on blog.amrevpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.